Hei, Mirka täällä Co-Foundry-podista. Pikku heads up, tää jakso on englanniksi. Ei kuitenkaan stressiä, tehdään jatkossakin jaksoja suomeksi. Mutta ei vaan haluttu, että missaatte nämä mahtavat vieraat. Joten nauti tästä special-jaksosta. Hi, this is Mirka from Co-Foundry Poddy. I just wanted to let you know that this episode will be in English. No worries, we will continue to do episodes in Finnish, but we also don't want you to miss out on these amazing guests. So please enjoy this special episode.
Jan, welcome to Co-Foundry.
Well, it's great that I could be here.
You are a quantum physicist turned deep tech entrepreneur and a co-founder and co-CEO of IQM Quantum Computers. The company has grown from a university spin-off to Europe's first quantum computing unicorn. And in today's episode, we'll explore how IQM grew from a lab to a global category leader. How have you succeeded in raising more than €500 million? And as an entrepreneur, how it feels to be in a non-established market, pioneering many things. So Jan, you have said that you are on a mission to make Europe a global leader in quantum technology commercialization. Why is that?
Well, I think the way we live in Europe and the values that we have are good ones, and I think they can be preserved. And if we think into the future, of course, the question is how do we make sure that we can sustain the life that we currently have? And in the end, it's always about technology. If you think about it, like over the decades or even centuries, those who were leading in technology, actually, they were able to preserve whatever they had. And from this perspective, I think it's very important that if we think about the future and if we think about the values and the democracy that we have here, we need to have a leadership position also on the technology side. And we have been losing a lot of races, how people say. Think about cloud, there's no hyperscaler in Europe. Think about now what's happening in AI. I think all the music plays in the US. But quantum, it's different. It's not yet there from a kind of maturity point of view, so we still have a chance. And this, for me, is one of the opportunities that Europe has in the end to be a technology leader in this field, and then hopefully also make sure that our kids and grandchildren maybe at some point will have a life like we have today.
Super interesting. Before we deep dive into the IQM story, what's your background? You're an entrepreneur now. Have you always been an entrepreneurially minded person, or?
I think deep inside I'm a scientist, and I studied physics. I fell in love with physics when I was a school kid, let's say. This is what I was good at, math, physics, these kind of topics. I studied physics in Munich and did a PhD in quantum computing. But at that time, it was very different. It was more like we would write quantum computing as a motivation in all grant applications, but no one really thought that it's going to happen like it is happening today. So when I finished my PhD in 2016, this was actually a time when in the US, it already started to change. So Google announced in 2015 that they would build quantum computers. Companies which are meanwhile stock listed in the US, they were kind of created around that time in 2015, but Europe is usually a bit behind. This is why actually I decided to stay on the academic career path. And I was doing a postdoc, and then the postdoc brought me here to Finland. And I was continuing to work in quantum computing, but very much on the scientific side of things. And then when my postdoc came to an end, I wanted to move on the academic side, and I was planning to maybe get a junior professorship here or there. But then the professor I was working with, he just said, hey, why don't you stay in Finland and we start a company together? And I was like, okay, I don't know what it means, but let's do it. It sounds interesting. So I was kind of thrown into the cold water. I had no idea what it means.
So you were not an entrepreneur, like doing paper routes at 14 or anything like that?
No, actually, I have never looked into this topic really. I was maybe even more this kind of a person who thinks that investors are maybe these bad people who kind of, it's all about money. And because if you are not in the ecosystem, you have no idea, right? You don't know the people and you only see what's written maybe in the media. And from this perspective, I was really unprepared. But ultimately, I think I was very positively surprised, like how great of a community it is and how supportive it is.
Yeah,
I'm super curious. That to me is really fascinating, that a professor did he have like a clear clear idea on what the company would be, or was it just like, I think the best way to scale what we want to do is through a company, or what was the idea behind it? How did he get you hooked into this idea to become an entrepreneur?
Yeah, I think that's exactly the point. So at that time, the fundamental building blocks were working, and it was really about kind of building a system out of it, this kind of system engineering and scaling. And this is usually not the job for universities, right? Universities are there to still push the boundaries of fundamental research and maybe still improve the bits and pieces inside the computer. But it's not the job of the university to build a large-scale machine. And this is what we have seen then in the US. I mean, at that time, companies were raising very big funding rounds already. So it was clear that if we want to build a large-scale machine, then it needs to be with the company. So the ultimate motivation was always to build a computer that no one else has built before, and to build a computer that can calculate stuff where we know no other computer on this planet will ever be able to solve it. So the motivation was, and still is, I think, still very much on the technology side. But it's clear that the instrument, the means to get there, is through a company, not through the university. But the university, of course, still has a role to play, and Mirka, the professor, he still is a kind of leading a very successful group, and we are hiring PhD students out of his group, and we are collaborating on the scientific side. So I think it's a very clear distribution of tasks now.
I completely agree, and I think I'd be curious to hear how you see it. I think recently, in the last few years, and especially within entrepreneur community, there's maybe a little bit of a dismissal of the academic, the purpose of it, and what role it plays in like developing these technologies. And of course, we consider the scalable model to be a commercial model, a company that like you said, turn things into big machines. But what is for you like the purpose of the academic side? What is their role to play? I'm just sideline curious.
I mean, of course, one thing is just the fundamental science, right? We as humans, we should never stop curiosity, and we should kind of explore whatever is out there. And maybe some of those topics will find applications and some not so much. Now, in quantum computing, I think we have a field where we have the application, but this doesn't mean that the role of the academic stops. It still means that we need to develop the bits and pieces further, and there's lots of kind of need for R&D and even science there. This is one thing. So helping us build better computers by innovating still on the component level. This is one thing. And the other thing is still this whole educational part. I mean, the talent part is super important, and already now we have a huge shortage, and this is something where also we as a company, and I personally engage quite a lot. I was just last weekend, I was with students in the Alps. They were doing a workshop there, and I was telling them about entrepreneurship, but also quantum computing. I still give lectures at Aalto University in physics. So I try to engage, and of course not everyone needs to become an entrepreneur in the end. We also need the great scientists who are just super focused on the science. But I think these are the main roles that the academics play. One is pushing what is possible on the technology side, and the other one is developing the next generation of tech leaders or even great scientists.
Couldn't agree more.
Do you remember the things you were pondering when you made the decision to be an entrepreneur and set up the company? Well, like what went through your head and were there any kind of key things that the professor said or anything like that?
Actually, the key thing was that, I mean, when I left Munich, my partner was staying there. So we had a kind of long distance relationship already for 2 years. And I called her, hey, what do you think if I stay a few more years? So yeah, to do a company thing. And she was very supportive. Like, I mean, no, because I'm super happy about this. But obviously this is a challenge that whatever you kind of dream or whatever you're very passionate about, in the end, it needs to fit into your other boundary conditions that you have on the private life, your family, your friends. This was super important for me to make sure that kind of this life plan that we are building here fits into our overall situation. I was never so concerned about the actual company thing. I'm a physicist, and physicists tend to think that they can solve any problem you throw at them, maybe sometimes in an unconventional way. This is a good and a bad thing, actually. But I was never worried about kind of the company thing at all, because also I didn't know what it means and how hard it will be, right? I thought, okay, let's just get a couple of millions and then we start another research lab and then we are all happy there doing our thing. But obviously
you're very optimistic about this. I would say that you're kind of a pioneer in this field as a researcher, to be optimistic about solving things with companies. Because many of the people, at least in Finland, of course, Finland is Finland, but the kind of the attitude is that, okay, let's not go into the the dark side and of creating a business and so on. We've had multiple tens of discussions at this pod that the only way to make sustainable change in the world through technology is to set up a company, because otherwise it's super difficult and unsustainable.
I think for an entrepreneur, you need a certain level of optimism. Of course, you shouldn't be naive, right? You shouldn't think, okay, now I fly to the moon and do whatever. But I think if you are seeing too much, maybe the challenges ahead, maybe it's not the right thing for you, because throughout the journey of a company, there will be so many challenges and so many things, of course, will go wrong, and you make mistakes and you learn from them. But if you kind of go into such a project already with a slightly negative mindset, I don't think it's going to work out. So I think it's as an entrepreneur, something that really helps. And of course, in the end, what needs to happen is that this optimism and the fascination that you as a person have, it needs to somehow then go into the team, right? Because you as a person, you can only do so much as an individual. So you need, in the end, you need to spark the team, and they need to create the same optimism and be very positive about it. And I think if the leader is already kind of questioning the topic or questioning the story, then it's very hard to build a scalable business out of it.
I want to know more about what's the benefit of being a physicist to be a leader in a tech company, but that comes later. IQM designs, builds, and delivers like a full stack quantum computers. So it's kind of turnkey solutions. So what was the founding vision, the IQM founding vision back in 2018, and how has it developed since?
Yeah, I mean, in 2018, if you look at the background of myself and the founders, it's very much know-how on the chip level. So in the end, the computers that we build, they have chips inside as you would have them in a smartphone or a laptop computer, but we do things a bit different to make them quantum. But overall, it's chip stuff. And we were very experienced in this field. We had IP there, patents. So the original idea was maybe even more to become something like an Intel of quantum, where you kind of do the chips. But the point is that if there is no industry yet, no one will buy just chips, right? What do you do with them? Put them to the shelf or what? So you need a system integrator. You need something like a Dell or so who builds a machine around this. And such a company was not existing. So it was clear that there is no business model in just selling out the chips, and this is why then actually we pivoted quite early into becoming a full stack system integrator. But also there, it's a journey, given that we were all very close to the hardware side of things. For example, the software came only much later. So many US companies, for example, they first went into the cloud and maybe now also trying to kind of sell full computers. We did it the other way around, which I think was a good decision. But overall, I think this tells you that as a founder also, you need to start where you're good at, but then you need to shape your business to where actually the opportunities are and where the go-to-market or the product market fit is in the end. And I think this is one of the key learnings, that even if you think your idea is great in the very beginning, you will figure out quite soon that, okay, maybe it was not that great after all. And I think then being stubborn is one of the first things, the worst things for founders, that they are too married to their original idea and are not open to make changes.
So IQM is the category leader in quantum computers, and you see a lot of like pioneering customers and different type of customers there. So what are the type of customers you are most excited about right now? There's a lot of banking or security or research type of things that quantum could solve, but what gets you out of the bed the most?
I mean, the point is that there are very strong headlines in the media out there about quantum computing and what it can do, maybe already tomorrow. But the reality is that we are not there yet. The computers that we build today, they are great for scientific computing. They are great for, of course, educational things and for proof of concepts. But I don't think any bank or any pharma company right now earns money by using a quantum computer. But this means that in the end, what we're selling today is mainly to big computing centers which are driven by R&D and science. But it doesn't mean that banks or automotive or pharma companies are not interested. But what they are doing right now is they are preparing themselves to become quantum ready, as we say. So they build up internal teams, they build up know-how, they build up IP, and then they want to test it on real machines. So it's a situation where most of the revenue that we make actually usually comes from customers which are government funded. And all the industry customers, they are still kind of trying to test the waters. And of course, what you read in the headlines is more kind of the industry story, because this is in the end of the one where the big markets are. But this probably still takes a few years until we are there.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I used to study business models at the university and these like disrupting innovations in general, and in many of those cases you have a technology or solutions that are creating markets. So in the quantum space, as you mentioned, you're kind of creating a market and you're creating a full suite solution to be able to solve problems in the early market, early adopters, like you mentioned there. If you could start IQM today again, like on the basis of what you know now, what would be the difference in the first few years that you would make?
I mean, of course, now it's a different time than back then, because there are now already quite a few companies out there. I mean, we even started late, right? So as said, some others started already in 2015. So we were already late in the game, but we still thought that there is a path for us to catch up. And I think we are on a very good path there. And we're meanwhile leading in many aspects. But of course, if you think about it today, it's a different thing, because now many companies have already evolved quite a lot. So probably you would need to think about a different kind of a strategy, what you would do. But I think ultimately building a company, it always, in the early days, it always boils down to having a good plan, which might change, and having then a good team, right? I think in the early days of the company, it's really about the team. Do you find the right people around you who can really kind of move fast, be innovative, and get things done? And I think this is what most of the very early stage investors are looking for, is this team able to execute. Because you can build the best business plan and have long Excel sheets and whatnot. I mean, it will not help you in the end if you're not going to deliver. So I think that's the most important thing. And I think there we did a pretty good job actually in the beginning. What we did when we were raising the seed round, actually we were asking from our network, mainly scientists, and telling them, hey, we are raising money for a company. If we get the money, will you join us? And this is why we skipped this very early phase of the company from, let's say, 0 to 20 employees, because we had this group of 20 employees who we knew very well, and we knew they're going to deliver. From this perspective, I think we skipped this very early phase, which I think helped us also then accelerate a lot. And this is definitely something I would do again, kind of focus on a core team and trying to get the right people together and then move as fast as possible.
So wait, so you already knew these like 20-ish people from the science community, and they were your first hires.
Exactly. And I mean, the nice thing is obviously we could give them real shares because there was no value yet attached to the company. And
just who was thinking about the commercial side then, if you had a team of mainly scientists?
There was none.
I think so. It was just a bunch of scientists doing science together.
I would say maybe the first up to 30, 40 people, we had 100% PhD rate. We still have way above 50% PhD rate.
I think it makes sense, but it's interesting to think, because when you're going ahead building a company, I think, I don't know about Aki, but I would think about building the commercial team and then maybe at some point a product, like a deeply embedded in the product team. But it seems like in this field it makes sense to do it the other way, or
I mean we were so far away from having a product. So we said, I mean, what we then said is, we're going to build 5 and 20 and 50 qubit systems, and then we just sell them to computing centers and research organizations. And people said, you're crazy. Who would ever buy a 5 qubit machine? There's nothing you can do with this. Yeah. But I compare it often to the early days of SpaceX. If you look at SpaceX, what happened there is they were building these rockets, and they were selling them to NASA and other government organizations. And many of them actually exploded a few seconds after the start, right? There wasn't so much real use. But now, if you look at the space sector, I don't know how many satellites are there around the Earth, but they created kind of this market. And this is how I see it. So we learn a lot from these very early computers that we have developed, and meanwhile we are selling them. But I think that's the point also a little bit of stubbornness is okay as a founder. So people said, you will never sell a single of those systems. But then we said, we do it anyways. And in the end, we did it. So, but there was no product in these early days. We were very far away from it.
But I would say that this quantum is like, if you have deep tech, then this is the deepest tech of deep tech.
Right.
So in a way, they having the scientists and so on the early team makes sense.
You're not the first company that I hear do it that way. I used to work in the VTT spin-off side of VTT, so not at VTT, but when that spin-off community, a lot of the companies started because they were dealing with technology that had no market or has no market still today, and they're trying to build a company within non-existent markets, which I guess is kind of what you guys were doing. And so you have no choice but to have a team that's also going to be very knowledgeable about the technology and develop the technology. But I think my guess is it's very hard to sustain a company that doesn't have like a clear commercial driving force. Or how did you experience it?
I think it also depends on, what is the kind of a company that you want to build and what is maybe kind of the exit scenario, how investors call it. Because I think there is a strategy where you just keep lean and you focus only on R&D, you build up IP, and then you sell maybe to one of the big ones and integrate there. So I think this is a valid strategy that you can follow, but this was never our goal. Our goal was always to build a sustainable business, a company that stays and kind of the leading provider for quantum computers. So this is why then after some time, of course, we brought in people with more commercial mindset. I mean, now we are running a chip factory and we are running an assembly line, we are running a data center. So there's lots of this kind of operational and infrastructure stuff as well. So of course now, if you think about whom we are hiring, we're still hiring great R&D people, but we hire way more nowadays also operational people, commercial people, finance, all of those supporting functions. So from 100% PhD and 100% physicists, we are kind of moving further and further away, obviously, in the mix.
Yeah.
But in this kind of a pre-product phase, you have to find funding from somewhere, and you've been able to, at least looking backwards, excel at that, being able to raise €500 million and ended up in a unicorn status and so on. You said that as a deep tech founder, you have to always be raising, and it's a feature, not a bug in the whole system. So can you elaborate on this?
I mean, of course, you raise money and then you already know the money is going to be gone again after maybe 2 years or whatever your business plan is. And I mean, in deep tech, fundraising takes some time because many of the kind of metrics that you would apply in more kind of conventional startups, let's say software as a service business, they just don't apply for deep tech, especially if it's hardware. So if you just plug in our numbers into any of those SaaS business models, I mean, nothing will come out. And many investors actually, because of this reason, say, okay, we don't even touch this. And maybe rightfully so, because they don't have the background and they don't have the experience to do so. So the number of investors is quite limited. The capital needs are quite high. So you need those ones with convictions, and then you build syndicates around that. And this just takes time. And fundraising can easily take a year or so. And then if you have only 2-year runway and you need already kind of after the story, maybe you need to brief a little bit and then you go out and test the waters with your new story, it's already almost time to start raising again. So I think this is one of the characteristics in deep tech, that the fundraising is often so hard that, I think you should always be out there and maybe there's an opportunity and then just grab the money that's there.
Yeah. And I think it requires a lot of bold venture capitalists and investors in general to be able to do that. And of course, sometimes it pays out. Like you mentioned the SpaceX and them being early in the market and blowing up rockets and so on and selling to the early customers. Nowadays, they have almost like a monopoly getting things to space. I think there's more than 1,000 satellites going into the space this year. So it's been going up a lot.
When you say it's important to be out there, what does that mean, be out there? Like, who are these bold venture capitalists and investors that you've approached?
I mean, Generally, I think for a founder, you always have to think one step ahead because it's a trust relationship as well with investors. So it makes sense to maybe already start talking to people who wouldn't even participate in your next round, but maybe in the round after, because you tell them the story and you say, hey, this is what we're going to do, and then you do it, and then maybe in the next round. So I don't think there is kind of investors you, at least in the very early stage, you should not talk to. Of course, then if you mature the company, you probably don't talk to the very early stage investors anymore because they cannot participate in the round. But I think it's really about this kind of trust building, because investors always talk to each other as well, and you want to be kind of the hot shit, right? When it's going there, and your name should be known, and people should say, okay, this is a great team, and they will deliver. So I think in the early days, it doesn't hurt to just talk to as many as possible. Of course, you shouldn't also waste your time, right? And from this perspective, there should be some filters. So, for example, if this is a fund which only does software and you do hardware, no need to talk maybe so much. But overall, you never know how these opportunities come together. I mean, we had fundraisers where we got, in the end, large investments from people who were introduced by investors who didn't participate, right? So I think there's also this networking effect, and it's you cannot predict this, and it's very non-linear from this perspective. So I cannot say talk to those people or not talk to those people, but I think building up the network, building up the reputation in the ecosystem is very important.
You recently announced like almost a 300 million euro Series B fundraising. Any first learnings from that? How did you end up doing that, and what were the key things? Like, without it wouldn't have happened. So any learnings?
Yeah, this was now the first round that we raised on a, let's say, proper revenue path, and one of my learnings was that making revenue as a startup is a good thing. Yeah. But the challenge, obviously, is that as soon as you start selling, people have the expectation that you will always sell more, and this might be challenging at times too, because also in our case, let's say we don't have recurring revenue, and each customer by itself can be rather big, can be 10 million, 20 million deals. So if a customer comes or doesn't come makes a huge difference, or if they get delayed. So the revenue predictions are very hard. So this was one of the key learnings for me, because I thought, wow, now we are kind of on a growth curve and we are selling systems, and it's going to be a kind of so easy to raise the round. But no, it's not, obviously. So from this perspective, this was a key learning. Another one, obviously, is that you don't raise those rounds anymore with the early stage venture capital investors. So you need to have a story. Now, in our case, for example, we had pension funds joining and other institutional investors, and they look much more on the actual numbers and how do you spend the money, compared to the early VCs who look more maybe on the team and the vision and is this aligned. So it was from this perspective a different fundraise, and it was not only storytelling anymore, but I needed to have people with me in the calls who were really on top of the numbers and could explain everything.
Many deep tech entrepreneurs say that finding the lead investor is the most kind of difficult thing in a round. How did you end up in this Series B? How did you end up with a bunch of tier one investors?
Yeah, and it's true. I think finding the lead investor also in our case for each round has been the most challenging thing. And then once you have it, you need to still wrap up, but it's kind of clear that it's going to happen. So the money is there usually if you find a kind of a credible lead investor. And in our case, the challenge, of course, is that we are doing technology that many of those later stage investors just don't understand. The business model is not yet 100% clear, and we are here in Europe where a lot of the growth capital just is not existing. So you need to think about ways to mitigate this, and what we did is here actually we worked with some of our existing investors, and in particular Tessie, who took quite a role there, and we kind of prepared everything. So we went out and we did already create commercial due diligence reports, technical due diligence reports. We collected a lot of kind of money from existing investors to de-risk the round. So we went out there with a story saying that look, the case is already half de-risked because our current investors are supporting us quite a lot. All the work for the round is already being done because here are all the due diligence reports. And then we managed actually to get a US lead investor. This was for us one of the key objectives, to get a US lead investor. Because in Europe, we have reached a stage where we are very well networked and we have very good commercial traction. So obviously, then the next thing that comes in the journey is to conquer the US. So this was, in the end, of course, not an easy thing to do. But finally, with this strategy, we managed to get a very good lead investor then with 1011 on board.
Super interesting. We noticed the same thing when we led the Reorbit's 45 million A round in June, and they had like a lot of interest from different investors. Like you said, the money is always there if the case is good, but then they didn't have like a lead investor in place. So we built together a lead investor consortium with a pension insurance company from Finland, and then a kind of a tech specialist investment company from Sweden. So then that kind of got the ball rolling, and then when we build momentum, then it's easy to navigate that, and you're able to get people to say yes or no. Because of course investors, they love to see the case as far as possible without saying yes or no.
Yeah.
In that case, which is weird. That's their job to say yes or no. But anyway, yeah.
With the identity of a physicist, as you mentioned earlier, how did at this point you must know the ropes and you must know how it goes, but at the beginning, was it challenging to learn how to communicate in these environments and know what to use as, what language to use that they understand and investors understand what you're doing? Or as a scientist, often you want to explain how deeply what you're doing, and sometimes that doesn't serve you so well.
I think overall it's a challenge. I think this is something where I have a little bit of talent, is to adjust my language to whomever I'm talking to. So if you look at my role now, I do mainly communication. So of course investors, I do a lot of the, let's say, talking to politicians, policymakers, journalists, but then of course also tech communication and internal communication. So I think this is one of the key jobs of a founder, is to communicate the story in the right way in all directions. Obviously, in the beginning, I had no clue about which language to choose, and I still remember there were situations. I had these very first investor calls for the seed funding round, and someone asked me, how does your cap table look like? And I didn't even know what a cap table is, right? And then you learn on the fly, obviously, and you try to make up a story. But
you're Googling words on your phone under the table.
But if I go to, let's say, the average politicians, maybe they also don't know what a cap table is, right? So I don't use this kind of a slang there with them, but I use more this kind of, we are a member state affiliate kind of language with those people. And then when I talk to our engineers, I can, of course, a little bit more R&D heavy. I think the main point is that you don't change the overall story. So you keep on telling the same story, but maybe in different words. And this is for me also kind of one requirement I set to myself, is I don't want to tell a story to the investors which is all shiny and big and this, and then turn around and talk to our own people and have a different version of it, because in the end anyways people will find out. And I think this is a challenge, of course, because investors want to hear this kind of, maybe a little bit even overhyped version, right? They want to see the big thing and how big can it become. And then if you have a scientist who's working day to day with all the nitty-gritty challenges that they have, it's a challenge to find the right balance there. It's a very fine line on the storytelling point of view, but in the end, again, it's about trust, and it doesn't help if you only have trust towards one direction, but your own team is not following you anymore, for example.
I love this learning of kind of exchanging hats or caps in this case. I have a teacher background, so I have a similar kind of approach on understanding how people learn. So then talking to a policymaker or talking to an investor, talking to another startup people, I'm trying to kind of adjust what I'm trying to say and the level of what I'm trying to explain. There's a really good Wired series where they've explained the same things for a 5-year-old, a teenager, and then an expert. And I love the kind of how did they build the story in that kind of stuff.
I was going to say that you guys have that in common, that you're if this communication is the skill that is really helpful to be able to get the buy-in from different stakeholder groups. But what do you think, Aki, is like for a physicist turned entrepreneur who doesn't have this skill that Jan is lucky also to have, and I'm sure many other physicists, especially professors, have. But if you're a scientist who ends up being an entrepreneur, having to raise funds, and you don't have that skill, what do you do?
Well, you have to kind of get to the water and swim. And if you don't really want to do that, or you're not kind of skilled enough, talented enough, you need to find a partner to be able to support that or take that role. Like we're going to the co-CEO role soon. But I think that's the key thing, to understand where your weaknesses are, or are you able to improve those enough? Or then if you don't, or you want, then you need to find another person to support.
To do it, yeah.
But it's super difficult if you have the vision and you have the expertise and a PhD in quantum stuff and so on. It's hard to find a person who can.
That's right. Yeah, that's what I'm thinking. Is I've have much less exposure to this than you, Jan. But my feeling is that sometimes scientists can be also a little arrogant in the fact that they have so much deep knowledge in this topic, and then when they approach somebody who doesn't understand the language they're using, they're thinking, well, they're just less knowledgeable, less intelligent. Maybe that's an exaggeration, but there's a sort of arrogance that comes with it, where they think, well, if you don't understand me, then you're not good enough for this, and then that might actually hurt their long-term business.
Yeah, and I mean, I was saying that physicists, they tend to think they can do everything and solve everything. It goes a little bit into this direction, and I think understanding something is not the same as implementing it and doing it. So for example, in the very beginning, if you start the company, you have to set up, let's say, the first work contracts, right? And of course, I mean, I can go through it and try to do everything myself. And many physicists tend to do it because also the way we work is we get a text and then we kind of turn around each word. Is it really the best word in this position, right? But obviously you don't want to waste your time kind of writing work contracts or things like this. So I think this is the main point, that you need to have a kind of certain level of humbleness and say, okay, I trust others. They are also good at it. If they come to me and they tell it to me, I understand it, and maybe I can give my opinion, but I'm not going to implement all of this, or I'm not going to tell everyone how they exactly have to do it. And I think that's the main point. And I think that's the key point also for a founder. If you want to scale a company, you will not be able to do everything yourself. So you have to let go. And from day one, you just have to let go. Every day you give a little bit here, you give a little bit there, because otherwise the company cannot grow, right? You will be the bottleneck and you will be the limiting factor. And I think that's a challenge for many physicists, because they think, yeah, I'm so clever, I can do all of this and keep it all to myself. Yeah, it doesn't fly.
Exactly.
How would you describe the Finnish quantum space? There's a lot of upcoming and existing companies. There's Blue Force is doing a really good job on, even from the revenue point of view, Quantrologs, QMill, IQM and so on. How would you describe the quantum space?
Yeah, I mean, super strong. I mean, definitely punching above the weight. If you think about Finland as a country and the size of the country, and then the number of both research organizations and startups that you have here. So I think I'm super excited about this, and there will still be more startups coming, I'm pretty sure, because we now have such a thriving ecosystem. And I think also now there are these kind of role models, and of course there's then the support. There might be even then some angels helping in the background and stuff like this. So I think very positive about it. I think what's missing a bit is still the adoption from the corporate side of things.
Got it,
Obviously, I mean, from an economy point of view, Finland is not the biggest country, but still there are quite some companies here that could try quantum out, and given that there's so much know-how here locally, I think this would be the natural next step. So we now have great research organizations, universities, we have great startups, or even more established companies like Blue Force you mentioned, but I think the next step is really now to get the kind of corporate and enterprise customers engaged.
Another kind of a area of business is this space-related, like new space-related stuff, satellites and so on. And I think the university is now trying to build like a program for like satellite, I don't know, new space or satellite engineers and so on, new kind of program. Are there anything happening at the university to keep your kind of need for talent in place, or kind of fulfill the requirements for having quantum?
Yeah, I think Aalto University was one of the first universities, even globally, to implement a quantum engineering degree, which is, I think, overall, this development that we see, that the whole field turns from a pure science effort into a kind of more industry effort. And we don't need only people who have the deepest know-how in quantum physics. We also need the people who can then kind of build the bridges towards electronics, towards software development, maybe even to the business side. I think at Aalto there's also some kind of quantum research going on the business school side of things, like how to build these deep tech companies. And I think this holistic view is super important, that we not only have these very kind of deep scientists, but also the ones who can build proper products and do engineering around it.
Coming to leadership and team building, I think that's one of your areas of strength, at least based on this discussion. Spotify recently announced a co-CEO model last week, and you have chosen this co-CEO model. And how would you kind of describe it, and what was the basis of selecting this type of a leadership model?
Yeah, I think the point is that everyone has strengths and weaknesses, and I'm maybe not the most operational person. This is one thing, and also I'm on the road quite a bit, given that kind of my role is very much talking to people all around the world. But still, the company needs to kind of grow on the ground where the people are. So there was clearly a vacuum there at some point. So we were growing from a team perspective, and we were also growing from a leadership team perspective. And it's hard to build such a team if you are not very present. So I think in the end, you have to choose: either you kind of change your role into something that's maybe not the perfect fit, because I said I'm not the most operational person, or you try to fill this vacuum in a different way. And this is then what we decided to do. So we said, I keep my role, which is very external facing, very much focusing on communication, but we implement a co-CEO, so Mirka now on my side, who is focusing more on the operational things, and also this whole commercial part of it, which is, I mean, I'm not a commercial person, so selling is very different from developing technology. So this is what we did now already almost 2 years ago, and I think it was completely the right decision. And the challenge obviously is to define those roles in a clear enough way that it's always clear to everyone from the outside and the inside, like who is doing what, so that there's not too much overlap. Of course, there can always be some overlap, but also there are no gaps left in the end.
But how did you end up with co-CEO? Like, instead of having a head of operations role or COO role or things like that, was it like it fit you better, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's in the end, of course, there are many different models on how to implement this, and also you have to kind of consider what the leadership team looks at every point in time. And back then, actually, we were in a, let's say, a little bit unlucky situation where we had some fluctuation in the leadership team, some unexpected, and this was not in our hands. So then we said, okay, and we knew money was kind of at some point running short, so we had to fundraise. So we knew we really have to make a, let's say, more drastic change, and this is what we decided to do.
Yeah, and it's a good model, but then you have clear goals on your side, and you don't feel bad all the time of not contributing a lot for the operational side. I know the feeling. Yeah.
I think there's something about optics as well when you think about the team on the ground, so to say, is if your CEO is always out there and basically you very not regularly see them, and then you don't have a CEO on location, you have a COO or whatever. And I think all of these roles are super important and equal, but there is something about optics where you have a CEO on site who you can talk to. I don't know if this is true universally, but I would imagine that for many people that CEO is that person, that role that you go to when you think you have this like captain on board. And if you don't have a captain on board because they're out sailing on some other ship or on the island somewhere exploring, then you think, well, okay, we don't have that captain on board. I don't know if this is true. But
this is true. And then on the other side, let's say many either investors or other important people, they want to talk to the CEO as well, right? So from this perspective, I think even though it's just a title, but it's good that it's on my business card.
It has to do with optics in some way, but I think it does apply in some cases.
So you reached unicorn status, which is like for the startup people, it's a holy grail and then end of all, and it's beautiful and so on. But from the entrepreneurial roller coaster point of view, you achieving that, how do you manage the expectations, like or internal or external expectations of being a unicorn?
Yeah, I mean, it was never a goal for us, and we have never communicated as a goal. But I think if you want to scale and if you want to become successful, at some point it becomes kind of an unavoidable step, so to say, because you're raising a lot of money, and of course also you have to think a little bit about dilution, so the valuation just have to grow. And I think the challenge is how not to overdo it. So this was one thing that I was learning when we were raising in 2020, 2021, when money was more or less free, so to say, right? There were big rounds and term sheets were just flying around. We were pushing the valuation quite a bit, which in retrospective maybe wasn't the best idea, because then things got a little bit tougher and you don't want to end up with a down round. Happily, we never went that way, but I think that's the challenge that I learned. It's not actually about the valuation, it's about what is the end game and how do you get there. And many founders, I think in the beginning, they just want to push valuations and valuations, but what you should do, in my opinion, is think about what's a reasonable valuation at an exit. Either you sell or you go IPO or whatever it is. How many rounds do you need to get there? And then what is roughly the valuations on these rounds? And then you just don't shoot too high in the beginning because it will backfire. So from this perspective, now also the valuation during this round, for me, it was just a stepping stone. But the goal is still to build a sustainable big business. And that's really for us the end game.
Many first-time founders fail to think about the valuation as a kind of steps onwards. And I did the mistake on Naava fundraising, the first venture-backed company I had was that I always wanted to have the highest, like in every step, the highest valuation. Then I managed to do that for 3 or 4 rounds, but then there were some problems and so on. You understand what happens then, so that's a problem. So having like the long-term vision and long-term understanding, and people perhaps advising you that, okay, it's not the right thing to do to have the highest valuation possible all the time. Yeah. So, tough question. Are you ready?
Yes.
What happens in quantum before 2030?
What happens? So this is basically 5 years from now, and within the next 5 years, we will see commercial use cases. As mentioned in the beginning, right now it's still mainly scientific computing, and that's actually, it's a growing market. It grows more than 12% globally, the scientific computing market. But what we need is the commercial adoption. And I'm quite convinced, and many other companies out there, if you look at their roadmaps, at our roadmaps, that what we see until 2030 is the first commercial use cases, probably in something like quantum chemistry, so simulating small molecules, things like that.
Drug development.
For example, drug development. And it's not going to be black and white. And many people think about it as a race, but the point is, with a race, at some point the race is over, there's a winner and everyone goes home, so to say. But we're talking here about an industry which is very similar to the semiconductor computer industry, where we have now seen Moore's law for decades. So it's not so that we say, okay, in 2030 we reach this and then we are all kind of leaning back and are happy, but it's really something that will keep on developing over decades. And I think that's important, one important aspect. And the other one is that it's not going to be a winner takes it all game either. Usually in this industry you see a few dominant players. And then many small ones actually as well. And of course our goal is to be one of the few leading ones, and I think we're on a very good path there. But then again, 2030, even though we have first commercial cases, it doesn't mean that we are good and things are over, but it just means we need to keep on innovating all the time.
Do you think it's possible that we could, or do we have and could we maintain like competitiveness, global competitiveness compared to other markets, Asian markets, US market, within the quantum computing field, or do you think that will be very challenging if things don't change? Or
of course it's challenging, but if it was easy, wouldn't we do it? But I think the point is that we do have the people and we do have the technology. Now, in the end, it's about scaling, and this means a lot. Do we get the capital together? Because, I mean, we were announcing this recent round, a bit more than $300 million US dollars. The day after, actually, a US company announced 600 million. A few days after, another US company announced 1 billion. Yeah. So even though we are proud, and rightfully we are proud of what we're achieving, it's not that the world is standing still. And I think the question is, can we scale this, and do we have the right capital, but then also the right people? I think this is another point that's here in Europe. There are not so many people who have been building big companies, right? I mean, there are not so many big tech companies over the last few decades that have been built. So we are also missing those people who actually know the journey. What does it mean to really scale towards a global company on the technology side? So it's the money, but then also the people who know how to put the money at work.
I think the Simon Sinek's infinite game and finite and infinite game suits really well on the quantum side. So it's not a finite round of game of something. It's a finite thing that progresses all the time there. Another tough question. What's a quantum fact that 99% of people don't know of?
Don't know of. I don't know if this is the right answer to the question, but what many people think they know, which is wrong, so basically turning the question around, is that this logic that we have big data problems all around the world, and because there's so much big data stuff, we need quantum computers. So quantum computers are actually not very good for big, like a lot of data, but it's very good for very complex problems. So I think this is, if you want to turn it into a positive thing, that the fact is that the problems that we talk about are actually very complex. They are so complex that our current computers cannot solve them whatsoever, but they are not very big in nature. So training an LLM, for example, is not for a quantum computer. It's not. It's this number crunching thing. But if you kind of do some pre-processing and then get the essence out, the essence might be so challenging that you cannot solve it anymore with any normal computer. And that's the way to see quantum computers, is more like an accelerator to then other computers which are out there. And I think that's very important to understand.
This is super interesting. I was going to say that I probably don't know 99% about computer, but
same here.
But it's super interesting and fascinating. I was going to ask, if you, as an entrepreneur, if you would have to start over in another company in a completely other different field than quantum computing, what would that be? What company would that be?
Well, mainly out of curiosity, but I would maybe try to bootstrap a company, so go the completely different routes. Not because I don't like investors. As I said, I have very good relations, and I think it's a very supportive community, but just to see how it feels, kind of to do it in a different way, in a leaner approach. So this would be something that I would find interesting, because now I play this kind of big game and getting a lot of investment and building factories and stuff. So seeing how it would work out with a small and lean and agile team, and maybe bootstrapping something, could be interesting for me as well.
It might feel like a quicksand, the whole fundraising game and so on. It's tough there. What's a bold vision or a moonshot that you would like to see happen? Non-IQM related one. Might be quantum space, might be other space, but what should happen in the next few years?
Well, I think we need to find a way to scale computing without this huge demand for energy. And also, of course, this then turns into costs. I mean, the way we currently build the data centers, they consume gigawatts of power, and they cost billions of dollars. And this is a challenge because right now they don't fit anymore our infrastructure. So the grid and the energy kind of is not there. And then even if we build out the grid and we build nuclear power plants everywhere, at some point, I mean, we cannot build data centers as big as Finland or something like this, right? So I think we need to find a way to scale compute in a much more efficient way. And of course, quantum could be one part of the solution. It will not be the complete solution. So we need also other things. And I think this is ultimately a challenge that if we want to develop further all the know-how that we have on this planet and push innovation, a lot of the innovation in the end boils down to how powerful the computers are that we use for them.
So the energy is complex in so many different levels.
Yeah.
I suppose here. What would be your guess? Where do you find the solution there?
Well, it can be manifold, right? Let's assume we get a breakthrough on the fusion side. This, of course, would be awesome for many other aspects as well. So I think, and there are now good developments. Of course, the challenge is there was always the saying fusion is 10 years out, and it's always 10 years out. So we have to see if now really we make progress. But this is one thing. Of course, there are also other ways of doing compute, neuromorphic computing, maybe even DNA and whatever kind of computing. But maybe also then the way we interface with them. So I hope that we will not be running around all with like these zombies with the smartphones, but maybe we find better way of interacting with the technology. And I don't also think it's these big goggles. But yeah, I think there are lots of opportunities there also then how we as humans interact with technology and make use of the technology so that it helps us.
Love that.
I love it. Thank you, Jan, for joining the Co-Founder podcast.
Thank you. This is great.
We as Finns are super proud of you and the whole IQM team that we are cheering for you.
Absolutely.
I always say that it's like a national team in some sports.
Yeah.
So
We've adopted you.
Quantum sports.
Yes. So yeah, this is how it feels. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.